Hey, good morning from rainy Kansas City. Welcome to SportsBeat Live, our weekly conversation about the Royals. We're sponsored by the University of Kansas Health System, and you'll hear from them later in the show. We hope to hear from you throughout the show, so please send along your questions and comments about the team that now stands with the Detroit Tigers as having the worst record in the AL Central and the third worst in baseball. Columnists Vahe Gregorian and Sam McDowell are here, and so is beat writer Lynn Worthy, joining us from Arizona, where he covered a wild one last night, including the first pitch of the game. But as well as it started off, Whit Merrifield home run on the first pitch and 3 home runs in the first inning. It ended as the previous 4 did, with a Royals loss. So the Royals dropped the first game of the second quarter of the season. The first quarter ended Sunday with, oh my, what a loss. So last night in Arizona was terrible, but Sunday's loss may have been the season low. Are we in agreement here? Lynn, let's start with you, since you were at both of them. As bad as last night was, blowing a 4-0 lead after the Royals batted around the first, Sunday was as dispiriting as it gets.
Yeah, I'd have to say so, especially the manner in which that happened with them, having gotten an outstanding performance from Brady Singer, 7 scoreless, and most of it with either no margin for error or 1-run lead, and then they finally give him some run support, 5-run inning, and they find a way leading 6-0 to lose it going into the 8th with a 6-run lead. And it wasn't one of those things where it was like, oh, they didn't have any of their guys and they were running out guys who probably shouldn't have been in those spots. It was their main guys, on the mound for a good chunk of that. So yeah, I think that's got to be about as tough a loss as they've had all season.
Yeah, exactly. You get the great performance from Brady Singer, the second one in a row, and we'll talk about Brady in a little while. But to see the bullpen struggle the way it did, especially Scott Barlow and Josh Staumont, that was so disappointing. And that it happened in the 40th game of the year, the game that Dayton Moore tends to indicate as the first part of the first stop in the progress report of the team. And to lose that one the way that they did, just a crushing loss. So let's do this. But before we get Sam and Vahe to weigh in, let's hear what a loss like that sounds like from a player who had something to do with that loss, Josh Staumont. So here's what Josh Staumont had to say.
What are sort of the emotions that are wrapped up in a game like that, the changes like that?
Probably the same emotions the fans feel. I mean, we're giving everything we got. Frustration is at the top. A game like this where Brady throws, everyone wants to do their job the best that they can. Everyone gives 100%. So to fall short in a game like this, super frustrating. There's just mental mistakes, some untimely walks compared to timely hitting. Frustration is probably on the low end of this. We needed this win today, and as a bullpen, we just didn't do it for the rest of the team. I mean, leadoff walks are probably the leading cause of a scoring inning. I mean, just can't issue free passes. That's all it is. So it's up to us. We know what to do. Going behind 2-0 on the first guy, it's a pretty tough situation. You don't want to give him something to hit, but you got to go right after him. So. Again, frustration. It's going to be the leading win in this game.
How do you guys regroup after a loss like that?
We do 162 times a year. There's no other way to get this job done consistently unless you're consistent with your emotions. If these are rough seas, you can't ride the highs because they're going to lead to lows and vice versa. So. Biggest thing for us is to get home, get our rest, do our job, because you got to show up tomorrow and do it again. So that's all it is. I mean, each person that goes on that field, especially pitchers, you have a goal in mind at all times. you're always trying to pick, especially coming guys on base. You're picking up the guy before you even think about anything that you're doing. Big situation with bases loaded, things like that. You got to establish first pitch strike, and we did that. And got those curveballs on the outside, and with our eyes, a guy that doesn't punch out very often, puts a lot of balls in play. You just got to be careful. So bases loaded for 2 outs. It's a hard thing. Those guys are moving. It's one thing to get that job done, but the job wasn't done. And I stepped out there the next inning and didn't finish it. So frustrating again.
Yeah, tough loss on Sunday for the Royals. It was the bullpen Sunday. It was starting pitcher Zach Greinke on Monday night, who could not, given a 4-run lead and a 5-3 lead, after the Royals hit twice, couldn't hold it, and still looking for his first victory back in a Royals uniform. Let's talk about this 40-game thing, though, Sam. Is that are we at a point, the quarter point of the season? Is that a fair milestone part of the calendar for an evaluation of this team?
Well, I think that we could determine earlier where the season was headed, and I think that the Royals told us that it was no longer their evaluation point when they fired Terry Bradshaw before that we even hit the 40 games. So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that I understand the concept, right? It's to not overreact too early in the season, but when you're where the Royals are and sort of mid rebuild, we all think they should be a little bit further in that progression maybe this year than what they've shown. I think you do have to evaluate some things earlier with some players, and you do have to be patient, even more patient than the 40-game mark with others. Bobby Witt's a great example. MJ Melendez is a great example. I don't think we should be making any determinations on where their seasons are headed because these are their first 40 games in the major leagues. But there's other guys, the Carlos Santanas of the world that the Royals probably need to be making determinations based after 40 games to see where is this guy headed and how does he fit into a future of a rebuild.
I think we can agree it's not a playoff team that we're looking at with the Royals, and in fact, their winning percentage of .351 right now. If they maintain that throughout the year, they'd be at 55 and 107 and set a franchise record for losses. And even though the Royals haven't turned a winning record in several years, I don't think anybody expected this kind of start for this team. So, if this season isn't about making the playoffs and making the postseason, what does it need to be about, Vahe? What or is it too early to make that determination that it's not, the season is not salvageable, and maybe injuries have played too big a role, and you got to get some guys back? And how do you feel about this?
I feel like I've got some movement here in the kitchen that I wasn't looking for, so I'm a little distracted. Hang on. Listen, you're asking exactly the crux of the question, right? I mean, here they are in this place already where it's almost impossible to see them extricating themselves from this. But you're also right. There've been a couple key injuries. There's certainly been a couple underperforming veterans, and most of all, we're kind of in this bubbling transition mode, waiting to see what 5, 6, 7, 8 guys are ultimately going to do. So I think, Blair, to your point, it probably is more about trying to flip this switch and look to accelerate what they think the future is. And that might mean trading some resources, trading some guys that maybe you don't want to part with to enhance the future, but also being really realistic about, I don't want to pick on Carlos Santana, but that's a pretty decent example, realistic about what space he's holding here, and how that could be a domino in some other development. One of the things that's always a little complicated with this situation is that we know in general, but also that the Royals in particular kind of like to set a fairly deliberate pace with their up and comers. I mean, we're seeing a couple guys getting their berths in the major league now, but those guys were really advanced. There's a couple players that are certainly doing well enough or have shown enough moments that you'd like to see them here. But I think typically the Royals don't want to flood the zone with that kind of thing. And I think that's an interesting question for them. But right now, I mean, everything's being, when you're not a very good team, you keep finding ways to lose. And that's what's happened the last couple of days, where their two best relievers couldn't hold that lead in the end. And I think Carl Greinke, their most consistent starter, didn't put them in a position to win. And this is the kind of thing that's happening right now. And it's one of those, the status quo is not working situations.
Yeah, Blair, I think that the Royals have to be making determinations on what best sets them up so they're not 14-27 in 2023. And that means, right now they've sort of been aided to go that route based on guys who are on, the COVID list and the injury list. So Kyle Isbell's getting a lot of at-bats. Michael Taylor's out. MJ Melendez is getting a lot of bats. Salvi and Cam Gallagher are out. But those guys need to get regular at-bats even when those other players return. And I realize you got to play Salvi every day when he's back. But MJ Melendez has to find his way into the lineup somehow. Because it's at this point, when you're 14-27, the question has to becomes what best sets these guys up for the future. And Len and I had a phone conversation about this yesterday. What are the ways that they can best set themselves up for the future? And as he mentioned, one of the things that would be difficult about that is that you might lose more games that route than you otherwise would if you're trying to win every day. And is that something the Royals are comfortable with doing?
Well, and it also sets back the rebuilding timetable, doesn't it? You basically punt 2022, and this was a year. Nothing was promised, but it was supposed to be a year of improvement to build on a 74-88 record from last year, win a few more games, edge closer to 500, if not 500, and maybe set your team up for a playoff run in 2023. I'm not saying something like an overhaul this season is impossible. Look at what the Minnesota Twins have done. The Royals finished fourth in the AL Central last year, ahead of the Minnesota Twins, and the Twins have shot by everybody in the division this year. I've long admired the Twins organization for many reasons, and this year adds another chapter to that. Look at the Diamondbacks. Diamondbacks won 100 or lost 110 games last year, and they're flirting. They're around 500 this year. I know it's early, but they've passed their 40-game mark, and they've got to be happy with the progress they've made there. But the Royals have taken a step back. There's no doubt about it this year, and it's I think it's time to reset and recalibrate. And so, what is that going to look like? What steps could be taken? And if we had to look at maybe a post All-Star break ideal lineup for the Royals, what might it look like? Lynn, do you want to take a stab at that?
Excuse me 1 second. Okay. I guess if you're looking towards the future, one of the things when you start getting towards the trade deadline, names that you start wondering if they're still here. You guys mentioned Carlos Santana. Andrew Benintendi's in the last year of his contract and is putting up some really good numbers. And he's also plays that outfield spot where you're probably, the outfield's where you're going to probably get some of these at-bats for guys, whether that's Kyle Isbell, whether that's MJ Melendez when he's not catching or not at DH, whether that means, you can get Hunter Dozier out there and maybe one of the guys that you're talking about bringing up is playing at first base. And so the Dozier's out there or at DH. So the outfield spots are going to be one of those places where you might be able to make some room for the young guys to get at bats. And then it becomes, whether or not in the pitching realm, if you start moving some of those guys just because you want to get to, some of these other guys to get regular starts. I mean, right now you are getting some guys regular starts, but if, right now Bubic and Hernandez are down in the minors, if you feel like you need to move them up and they're ready to be moved up, right now you've got a full rotation. Does that mean you take another one of the young guys out, or are you moving somebody else to make room for them? So I mean, and then also, I mean, I know a lot of people don't want to go this route. I know the Royals have stayed away from it, but Whit Merrifield's another guy that, veteran type guy. Um, his flexibility gives you a lot of room, but if you take him out of the equation, then maybe that means more spots again for at bats for some of these younger guys. But as Sam was alluding to, I'm not sure that. I mean, I don't. It's hard to make the case that's going to make you a better team this year. So the people who are, sort of shouting at the moon about the record this year, that doesn't get better when you throw in all the young guys. I mean, even Bobby Witt, who's is their best guy and who's played well. I think his average now is around 220, and he's the best one supposedly. So if you bring up all those young guys, and there's the learning curve when you first get to the majors, no matter who you are, the record doesn't get better this year if you're doing that. That has to be, as Sam was talking about, a move to try and avoid this type of a start next year. And I'm just not sure if the Royals are ready to do that yet. At what point they will be. I mean, I think once they get out of contention, then that's when you start looking at that sort of things usually. But I guess, I mean, it could be a case to be made that maybe that needs to start earlier.
Vahe, you used the term flip the switch. I remember hearing that about a decade or so ago with the Royals. And you know what? A decade or so ago, it worked. The Royals did flip the switch. I want to say it was 2011.
Yeah.
So you weren't here then, but I know you've written about it. And remind us what happened then.
Well, part of it was sort of embodied in Eric Hosmer, but it was really, emblematic, or whatever term you'd use, of the whole movement, when it was sort of a critical mass, time to move Hosmer up. And they were sort of in a what are they waiting for mode. Now, what's interesting about that is obviously it ultimately took to great effect, but it was not what was that old story they used to tell about Cool Papa Bell, that he could run, that you could turn off the light switch and he'd get in bed in between the time the switch was turned and the time he got in bed? It wasn't fast like that. It was, some wiring that was a little different. But I think it said the future is now. And it was, with that came Moustakas and Perez. I can't remember who was first in that sequence, but all those guys. But that was 2011. 2013 was the next winning season. Now, the parallels aren't perfect, but the concept, I think, is sort of what we're talking about.
In bed before it got dark, I believe, is what Cool Papa Bell did. But I'll take it one step further. I remember the flip the switch idea in 2011, and then being really disappointed in the Royals in 2012. That was the year that they were hosting the All-Star game. That was the year the team slogan was "Our Time," basically promising for some results, and it was not the Royals' time. And very disappointing season, which led to the 2013 turnaround that prompted Dayton Moore to say, "This feels like winning the World Series." He was only 2 years ahead of his time when he said that, but and it obviously caused some ripples when he said it. But I find it interesting that 2011 was absolutely a transition year. 2012 was disappointing in the results. People were really ready for a winner, and then we saw it start to happen in 2013. So. All right, guys, let's take a break and hear from the University of Kansas Health System.
March 4th, 2015, I got out of the shower and felt a lump in my left breast.
We were able to quickly uncover that she had 2 subtypes of breast cancer, each of them requiring separate and unique treatment plans. This is why you come to the University of Kansas Cancer Center.
It is critical to be treated by a team of experts in that specific cancer type. If you don't start with us, I think you'll have more questions than answers.
Why would you go anywhere else?
We're back on SportsBeat KC with SportsBeat Live, I should say, with Sam McDowell-Linworthy and Vahe Gregorian. We're talking Royals. Send us your questions and comments, and please talk Royals with us. Let's get to a couple of players. We mentioned Brady Singer earlier. Lynn, what has changed with Brady Singer, who has gone in his last 2 starts, 7 innings, no runs, total of 12 strikeouts. I want to say 3 walks, but the best Brady Singer has looked in a Royals uniform.
Well, I think you hit on the right phrase there with change, as in the changeup is been the major thing that I think people had been sort of beating their heads about for a couple of years now, is his unwillingness to throw that pitch, his maybe stubbornness to rely on fastball slider, and just the inability to produce consistent results with just those two pitches. We've seen it in stretches. We've seen it, in some outstanding outings. There's that no hitter he took into the eighth in Cleveland. So you've seen flashes, but it just hadn't been all put together. And then when he went down to the minors after having been in the bullpen, it lit a little bit of a fire under him, it seems like.
Yeah, for sure. He absolutely seemed to be motivated when he came back, and the fact that he's throwing the changeup, and teammates reminded him of the changeup with that little present in the locker room, the Baseball America headline. I thought that was pretty amusing. I hope he found it amusing.
It was amusing, by the way, but also, Lynn, what did you do with it? Brady Singer handed it to you, the Baseball America.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have it in Arizona, but I still have it somewhere. So yeah, it's I think because I had asked, it was hanging there, and I said, so what magazine is that? What's on the cover of that? Just being a little curious about it, and he just yanked it down and said, "Here you go," and just handed it to me. So yeah, I said, I guess, well, I'll just hold on to that. That might be an artifact, when he goes into the Royals Hall of Fame one day. Here we go, the infamous changeup magazine.
Get him to sign it and offer it to charity. That might be the thing to do with it. So, Sam, can we squint a little bit and see a future Royals rotation of Brady Singer and Brad Keller and Lynch as the foundation for that, maybe in the next couple of years, and if so, who might we see added to that and to round it out and complete it? Unmute yourself, Sam.
As bad as Sunday was, you could actually argue it was more positive than negative because Brady Singer looked that good on Sunday. And if you have already recognized that this team is probably not going to be in playoff contention, and winning 70 games is not all that different than winning 71. I mean, I think the one guy on Sunday that you would have liked to have thrown or performed well would have been Brady Singer. So this was a guy that 2 weeks ago, this town had decided was a bust. And now all of a sudden Brady Singer is throwing as well as anybody in the rotation. But in order for the Royals to complete this rebuild, those three guys you mentioned, Blair, have to be part of the rotation. And, I think the other guys are probably need to come from that 2018 draft class. It doesn't mean you can't go sign somebody. I mean, in 14-15, when the Royals built this thing up, they acquired all their pitching basically outside the organization. Now, they've got Jonathan Heasley, I think, has something. He's good with his command. I think, he'll get hit harder when his stuff does land in the zone than some of these other guys. You wonder about, what Bubic and Co are, whether or not those guys can come back in the way that Brady Singer has. I think he's offered them an example and a lesson that a demotion to the minor leagues doesn't have to be, a sour point in the season, but rather can just be a blip in the radar. So Dayton Moore obviously made that point last week, and we may have talked about it on the show about the fact that he takes some ownership of Brady Singer's route to the pros, brought him up too early. But you still have these guys under team control for 4, and in some case 5, in some case 6 years. So you've got time to still develop these guys, even though they are 24, 25 years old. And again, just to put a bow on that, the future of their rebuild depends on developing those particular players we're talking about.
You mentioned the 14 and 15 teams. One of my favorite notes about that group was Yordano Ventura was the only starting pitcher who started games in the 14 and 15 postseasons. Completely overhauled the rotation in those years. So yes, it absolutely can be done with by acquiring pitching. Carrie asks, Lynn, we'll give this to you. How many years away is Asa Lacy?
Well, I guess that depends on whether or not they're willing to rush him as well, given what Sam just said and Dayton's comments about them having rushed both Brady Singer and Chris Bubich. But I think he's probably still a couple years away. I mean, remember his first season, if you want to call it that, was the pandemic year. So that wasn't really a year where he had full baseball, either at the college level or the professional level. So last year was the first year in the minors. As much as everybody wants to say, "Oh, well, he pitched in the SEC, so he must have been at a higher level," it ain't professional baseball. And then when you add in the fact that you had a lot of your season wiped out and all of your first professional year wiped out, you got to slow that down. So I don't think he's a guy who's on the radar for next year, but I wouldn't be surprised if after that, or if he maybe puts himself in contention at some point next year to be on the cusp. But I mean, they've got some other guys in the minors who are probably in that next level, above him anyway, whether that's Alec Marsh or Drew Parrish or, some of these guys who've been in the system a little bit and who have, had a little more experience in pro ball.
Another prospect that we're hearing a lot about these days is Vinny Pasquantino, the first baseman /DH in Omaha. He's not on the 40-man roster. So what would it take to get Vinny some major league at bats, Lynn?
Well, I think I'm stealing the comment from, I think it was Flanny used to always use this one. I think it was a Dave Island one. I apologize if I'm getting the wrong name, but it's like, there's no room on the 40-man. Give me 5 minutes, I'll make room on the 40-man. So, but I mean, if they felt like that was a pressing issue, then whether that means dealing somebody or designating somebody for assignment, but you'd have to make a move on the 40-man to put him on, and then you could put him in. But again, it's as referring back to earlier conversation, you got to make sure he's going to get at bats. You got to make sure there's regular playing time for him. You got to make sure there's a spot for him. It's not just get him on the roster, bring him up so you can say he's in the big leagues. You got to get him time to see what he can do and adjust to this level. But I mean, sure. I mean, I don't want to, throw anybody overboard, but it's, if you make a deal or if if you decide that you're going to bring somebody like him up or Nick Prado, then that's probably marks the end for somebody like Carlos Santana. So that's probably where that spot comes from if you decide to move that way.
Right. The Royals have done this in the past under Dayton Moore. They have, DFA'd players. Omar Infante, I remember in 2016, who was, contributed especially to the 2014 run and still had a couple years left on his contract, was DFA'd. So it has happened in Royals history. I guess they have to determine, different circumstances then. The Royals were still in contention and were looking to, to stay, to compete for postseason spots. That's not the case this year. But I think certainly in Royals fandom, they want to see the future, and the future isn't Carlos Santana or Ryan O'Hearn at this point. So, all right, guys, I think we covered the depressing Royals about as well as we can here. The series continues tonight in Arizona, but they stay on the road. If I think right, 4 with Minnesota, 3 with Cleveland. Lynn, is that where they go from here?
Yeah, it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Minnesota. So you have 4 and then Cleveland. So, yeah.
There you go. All right. So
they one off day tomorrow, get the first off day in forever. This is that's another thing that, I mean, I asked a couple of guys about it this past week, and nobody wants to sort of go there because they feel like it's an excuse. But this is also the end of a stretch of 19 games in 17 days for them between the doubleheaders and rainouts and things getting moved around.
Yeah, it has been a busy stretch for the Royals, and of course, it was all condensed because the season started later, also, so it naturally was compressed. Just complicating matters for the Royals. So, All right, you guys. Many thanks for the conversation. Sam McDowell, Vahe Gregorian, and Lynn Worthy. Monty Davis was great spinning the dials and producing today's show. And thank you for your questions, comments, and attention. We'll be back next Tuesday on another edition of SportsBeat Live.